Now, kids, I don't want you to get the wrong point. If your parents tell you have to clean your room because you have company over, you have to clean your room. Yeah. All right, so today we're looking at the story of Martha and Mary. It's actually one we've handled before, but it just fits so well with this moment. And you can almost like picture it in your brain, right? You know, you got two sisters with a different idea about what the right thing to be doing at the time is. Now, as often is the case, and we talk about a lot around here, when we pull these little scriptures, stories out by themselves, we lose some stuff. And if you notice at the beginning of the scripture read today, it said at the beginning there was a nice little connecting word. It said now then the disciples, which basically is a trigger and a little meaning thing for us to say, this is actually a bit of a continuation of what just happened. And actually, chapter 10 really is a bunch of stories that we can look at as distinct, but really aren't, and they all kind of build on each other. So if you go back to the very beginning of Luke chapter 10, you have Jesus sending out the 72. He basically talks about how he's sending out the 72 disciples to go to towns and be with people and talk to them about this coming of the kingdom of God, as Jesus puts it. And he basically tells them to do what Jesus does at the end of the chapter with Martha and Mary. He says, go to their homes and, go to whatever home will take you in and eat whatever is before you and tell them this good news that you know. So at the beginning of the chapter, he's telling the disciples to go to do this. And at the end of the chapter, we see that Jesus isn't above taking his own instructions. And we see Jesus doing exactly what he just told the disciples to do at the beginning. Now, there's a thing sandwiched in between the beginning of chapter 10, which is sort of the beginning of this time of journey. Jesus sends the disciples on a journey. He himself is on a journey. And then in the middle here, he actually sandwiches something else in there, which is another journey story, which is Luke's telling of the Good Samaritan story. Now, the Good Samaritan story is another one that we all probably know pretty well, but if you don't remember, the Good Samaritan story is a story about a man that was beat up and left on the side of the road, and the story is about how all the good people, and frankly, how all the righteous people walk by him on the other side of the road, and yet the Samaritan, the one who shouldn't have anything to do with the person on the side of the road because the person on the side of the road is a Jew, and Jews and Samaritans don't have anything to do with each other. So Jesus tells the story about how it's actually the Samaritan is the one who provides aid and comfort to this man. Now, what's interesting is, if you go back, and this really makes a lot more sense in the Greek than it does in our translations, and maybe someday I'll just have to teach you all Greek. We should have a class. Who wants a class on Greek? Nobody? All right, fine. There's software now. It's not hard. Anyway, it makes a little more sense in the Greek because it shows up a little more prominently. But when the Samaritan was introduced in that part of the story, it says there's a certain man, and it talks about from Samaria. When Martha and Mary are introduced, they say it says again, there's a certain woman, Martha. So there's already this connection that's actually being made linguistically between these two people. And so Jesus tells the story of the Samaritan. And again, if you remember that story, you know why. He just doesn't randomly walk up to somebody and says, hey, can I tell you a story? I mean, I'm sure he does that sometimes. But in this case, he's telling a story in response to a specific question that he's being asked. Because while he's on his journey, he's encountering people. And the religious leaders of the day love to do what religious leaders do, and I know this because I am one, which is to make themselves look important. Come on, you know it's true. All right. My staff's really laughing at that. I don't know. Even more so. All right. Anyway, but that's what and so they go and they test Jesus, like, oh, if you're such a great teacher, answer this. And of course, the question is, what's the greatest commandment? And the person responds, the lawyer that he's speaking to responds, quoting Deuteronomy, quoting the Old Testament, actually. He says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, you have given the right answer. Do this and you will live. And then he goes on to tell the Good Samaritan story, and it's an illustration of the idea of what does it mean to love neighbor. right? Because Jesus was smart enough to look at this lawyer that was in front of him to say, your problem is that you don't know who your neighbor is. So let me tell you a story to tell you who your neighbor is. And he tells him the story really as a way to help him understand that he has a very narrow definition of what a neighbor is and who he's supposed to love, and Jesus has a very broad definition of it. So that's the first part of the story, and it covers the kind of the second half of the commandment, love your neighbor. And then it says, now, Jesus goes on. This is a continuation of the same story, and in many ways is addressing the same thing and addressing the same question and addressing the same commandment. The problem when we take these things in isolation is we can say, oh, Jesus says, here's the thing, here's love, and then he explains what love the neighbor is because the person in front of him was challenged by that and didn't know what that meant. So he says that is, but we shouldn't believe for a minute that Jesus doesn't also want to address the what does love your God mean. And so he continues on, and then he has this encounter with Martha and Mary, which stands for us as an example of what does it mean to love God. And so the Samaritan's problem is he didn't know how to love his neighbor. In this story, Martha's problem is she's missing an opportunity to love God. We sometimes have what we call a bias towards action, right? And we like people with a bias towards action. We like people who, when encountering something, will actually do something about it, and we want to do things. We want to do things all the time. Not recognizing that sometimes the thing that we need to do is to maybe not do something. Let others do something or be around others. Martha is too busy doing to see what was going on and see the opportunity she was missing. Now, I don't like this because I sympathize with Martha. Because in this story, I'm Martha. I'm the one in the kitchen. I'm the one getting everything ready. Not only that, but there are systems in my house for when we are having guests over. Dane knows this. There are systems in my house about when we're having guests over about how things need to be so that everything is just nice and it is for the guests. And one of the things that absolutely has to happen whenever we're preparing for guests, especially if we're preparing food for guests, the first thing that has to happen is the dishwasher has to be empty. Empty. We cannot start with a full dishwasher. So the first thing you do, basically before you get your kitchen all messy and disgusting cooking a bunch of food, is you get it all clean and put everything away before you get everything back out. And there's a reason for this, and I've been trying to teach this to my children, that this is the right way to do things. It's going okay. Yeah, it's going fine. You've learned. Because you need some place to put the things that you're going to get dirty other than the sink, right? You need a place for them to go other than the sink, because the last thing that I want is to have a bunch of guests come over for something that I have made and see nothing but a dirty kitchen and a bunch of dirty dishes in the sink and have them go, oh, you must have worked so hard, right? I don't care if I worked hard. I don't want you to see it. I want you to do it. I'm like, this is my thing. No. And so you start with the empty dishwasher. It's a little tip from me. You start with the empty dishwasher. You put all your dishes in there, right? And then the nice thing is the dishwasher's doing its job while you're eating, and then when you're done eating, you can pull all those out, and then you can put all your dinner dishes in there, and then you don't wake up to a dirty kitchen. It's good times. All right. But I sort of have this thing. I like things to be just so. And Dane will know the thing that stresses me out more than anything is when the guests arrive, or God forbid they arrive early or late. Just arrive on time. If you're ever invited, just come on time. So that's because I want things to be just so, and I want things to be nice, because I think that's, for part of me, that's hospitality. That's what we should do, right? And I'm not saying don't do that. And I don't think Jesus is saying don't do that either. He's not saying don't care, about those things. But most of the time, like when he's asked about things like hand washing or things like that, he's basically saying you're putting the activity ahead of the purpose. Right? You're putting this activity, this idea that we're supposed to wash our hands a certain way or do this thing a certain way, you're making that the important thing, not what the thing's about. And the challenge is we get too caught up with making everything perfect for our guests when they come over and keeping ourselves so busy, as we lose the idea, we can lose track of the idea that the whole point is to spend some time, hopefully with people that we like. If you're inviting them over, I hope you like them. But it's to spend time with people that we like and care about. And when I do it right, the nice thing about having all of that done ahead of time is that you can spend time and energy, and you can be like, I can invest this time in you because I don't have this big thing of dishes hanging over my head, right? But the problem is when it doesn't work and it doesn't go well, and I'm not able to prep the way that I want it to, then it's too easy to get distracted by everything that didn't go the way that I wanted it, or wasn't ready the way that I wanted it to be, or didn't turn out to be as tasty as I wanted it to be. And you can lose the important thing that you're doing in that moment, which is sharing some time and sharing some of your life with your friends and your family. Martha and Mary are invited to spend some of their time. They're invited to spend some of their life with Jesus. Mary takes up the opportunity, and Martha's too busy making sure everything is just so. Now, the other thing that's important that links also Martha or Mary and the Samaritan together is, as we talked about, the Samaritan isn't the one who should have done that because it was sort of against the norms of society at the time. The norms of society at the time said that Samaritans and Jews don't interact. So the Samaritan should not have been the one to cross the road. At the same time, the reason that Martha is so upset is because they're living in a time and in an age when the norms of society at the time said Martha was where she was supposed to be doing what she was supposed to be because women belong in the kitchen. Men, don't repeat that. It's not 2,000 years ago. But at the time, that was the standard. That's what the norm. That was their job. And in fact, the ones that should be sitting in the feet in front of Jesus is the men. The ones that should be sitting at Jesus' feet at that moment are the guys, not Martha. And we can get caught up in this. We can get on what we're supposed to do, what the right thing to do, versus what's the best thing to do at the moment. Now, I was thinking about an example of this for a while, and I was like, I was struggling to come up with one until I had one of those things where Facebook says 7 years ago this happened. I was like, oh yeah. I remember that now. And so something popped up on my Facebook feed that reminded me of an experience from several years ago, back when I lived in Montana. So when I lived in Montana, I was actually, and then still am to a part of a trustee group that looked after one of our camp properties. There are several United Methodist camp properties in Montana. This was one of them. Unfortunately, long story, we sold this property, but at the time it was still ours. And this is Camp on the Boulder, which is located south of Big Timber, probably in the Boulder Valley, almost Yellowstone, but you can't get there unless you're on a horse. And it's probably some of the prettiest country God ever made. I love Colorado, it's fine. But this place is amazing. And I used to love spending time there, and so when an opportunity came to be on the board, I was like, yes, I want to do that. And we went through a season like a lot of camps have where we weren't being utilized the way that we wanted it to be, and we really weren't seeing the guests that we were expecting to see. And so we had a lot of unused rooms and a lot of unused cabins on the property that were going unused all summer. And so we started to talk about it, and one of the cabins had actually been built as a pastor's retreat cabin. And so we went to the pastors in the area and said, hey, we have this thing. You can come. You can stay for free, right? We'd even feed you while you were here, and we want to be known as this place for pastor retreat. And the thing that we thought was like, they'll come, and we'd love to just bless them. Maybe they fall in love with the place like we do. Maybe they bring back some paying clients. I don't know. But we put it out there, and we put it out there to all the clergy in Montana. And the reality is exactly 0 took us up on it. And what we kind of figured out is, unfortunately, if you're clergy in Montana, you probably are within 50 miles of some place that looks like this, right? I mean, it's a nice experience, but it's not a unique experience. So then we're like, well, maybe we need to cast the net wider. And so we got out a map, and we're like, where are the places that look nothing like this, that would have nothing, that wouldn't have the opportunity, where there's clergy that wouldn't have the opportunity to do this? And then we looked at the map, and we were like, oh, Nebraska. And Kansas, and Oklahoma, and we was like, look at all these areas. So we sent out a note in the spring to all these places and said, can you please pass this along to your clergy? Please come be a chaplain at our camp for 2 weeks. You can come, you can stay for free, we'll feed you. All we ask is that you offer a worship service to our staff on Sunday, which is something we weren't able to do at the time. Otherwise, just come and hang out and have a good time. And what do you know? We had takers. And we had people come out, like, well, can we come out for a week? And I'm like, nah, you really just need to come out for 2. I mean, you're going to need 2 weeks to kind of decompress. Trust me, it's going to be okay. And so we started having him come out. That first guy came out. It was part of a couple. First came out, and about 3 days in, I get a phone call because I'm the one coordinating this, and I get this phone call from him. Now, there is no internet at camp. There is no cell phone service at camp. There is a co-op phone line that's really, really scratchy that costs us like 10 or 15 cents a minute to make phone calls on. So we don't get a lot of phone calls from camp. But I get this phone call from camp, the guy, and I'm like, hey, how's it going? He's like, oh, this is so-and-so. We're here as your chaplain this week. Yeah, okay, good. How's it going? I'm like, it's great. What are we supposed to do? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, what are we supposed to do? Like, they haven't given us anything to do. And I'm like, rest? And I'm like, I don't understand. I was like, well, it's a retreat, so you get to retreat. You get to do whatever you want to do. And I'm like, well, yeah, but don't you have some work for us to do? And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, you could run a service on Sunday. That would be great. But that's really it. And he's like, and it was like silence for 15 seconds. And the guy's like, I don't understand. Why are we here? And I'm like, to rest and retreat. I thought it was in the title. He's like, okay. And I found out later from the camp manager that this guy finally had to find something to keep himself busy, and he found little jobs to keep himself busy and all that kind of stuff, which were great. And I'm like, well, that was really weird. I mean, obviously that guy just didn't get it. 2 weeks later, next guy shows up. 3 days in, I get a phone call. What are we supposed to do? And I'm like, retreat. Like run away? No, I mean like. At this one, we get in a little bit more involved conversation, and it took a little longer than this, and it wasn't quite this succinct, but eventually I was talking to the guy, and I'm like, look, man, you're being a bit Martha about this, and I need you to be a little more Mary. He's like, what do you mean? I said, you're in the prettiest place you will probably ever spend time. Guarantee you walk 10 feet, 10 yards into those woods, or 10 yards up that mountain, you will find Jesus. Go find Jesus. That's why you're there. He's like, oh, okay. And I got, after about a couple weeks after this, I got this note at my house from the guy. He was like, I am so glad we came. I am so glad for the time. I am so glad that you didn't give us anything to do. I promise you, we found Jesus lots of places. And what we learned is when we had these people come in, it took about 4 or 5 days, and I'm glad we insisted on 2 weeks. It took 4 or 5 days for them to be able to shed all of the busyness, to shed all of the expectations, to shed the need to be doing all of the time before they could spend their second week acting like Mary, spending some time in retreat, finding opportunities to find God in nature, because you will, spending some time maybe in Scripture, spending some time in a book. I got notes from pastors saying, this is the first time I've ever really had an opportunity to read Scripture for something other than preparing for a sermon or a Bible study. It's the first time I got back into the Word in the way that I used to love reading the Word when that's all it was about. Thank you for that gift. It's really hard to be Mary in a world that wants us, sometimes needs us, to be Marthas. It's even harder when we recognize that for most people in that room, that they believed Mary was doing the wrong thing because she was doing the thing other than what society and what expectations said she was. I love this depiction of the moment because we've got Martha pleading about Mary to Jesus, but then you've got the men in the background going, Mary's sitting in our seat. She's doing what we're supposed to do. What? How is this okay? And I'm sure that they were expecting, when Martha showed up, for Jesus to rebuke her and say, yes, get back in the kitchen where you belong. But instead, Jesus says, Mary has chosen the right thing, and it will not be taken from her. Mary has chosen to value loving God. The challenge we face is that sometimes we're the lawyer who forgot how to love neighbor, and sometimes we're Martha who forgot how to love God. And the tension in our faith has always been that we are called to do both. And the truth is, the better we get at practicing our love of God, the easier it is to love our neighbors. And when we love our neighbors, oftentimes it's in those places where we can find God in a new and different way. All the way back in the Old Testament, it tells us exactly what we are to do. Love our God with our whole heart and love our neighbors as ourselves. We put it on our back wall. Love God, love neighbor, and love self. We're called to do all three. Mary chose well. The Samaritan chose well. We are in a season where we get the opportunity to choose as well. And so the question is, who are we? We're probably all a little guilty of being Martha from time to time. We're also probably all a little guilty of being those religious leaders that went on the side of the road. God calls us, Jesus calls us to somewhere else. Even if it means enduring a few awkward moments, a few little bits of family drama, when it's clear we're trying to do something and somebody else is trying to do something else. Let us remember to make time for God and love of God. Because we will find God if we go looking. Yes, you'll find him in the mountains and in the trees and even in the mountains of Colorado, which are perfectly lovely. You will also find him in your friends and your family when they gather in your home and you share your love and your fellowship together. You will find them in this place, we hope. You will find them on walks. You can find him in your work. God is everywhere. We are called to look, and we are called to love.